Okay, so welcome everyone to our first of three sessions on Farmers' Voices Matter. This session is going to be on small scale meat production, and we've got great guest speakers I'm going to introduce in a moment. But first, I just wanted to quickly give you an idea of the breakdown of tonight's session. So first, we have with us Integrated Farms, Dorothy and Chad Coghlin, who are going to share their experience with us with the Chicken Farmers of Ontario's local niche markets program for their fully pasture raised chicken. Then we're going to have a time for some questions for Dorothy and Chad. And then we're going to take a quick break and for a couple minutes for folks to get a washroom break or what have you. And then we're going to come back and have an open discussion with everyone around identifying problems and solutions to small scale meat production in the province of Ontario. So with that said, we're going to get started here, and I'm going to provide a brief introduction to Chad and Dorothy. So Chad was raised on a cash crop farm surrounded by a legacy of agriculture. One side of his family operated a dairy operation, while the other managed a diverse beef, pork, and homesteading farm. Seeking new horizons, he earned a diploma as a mechanical engineering technologist and began a career in the industry. His farming roots and technical skills would later prove essential to his journey. And Dorothy is a first generation Canadian born to Polish immigrants. She grew up in a family that valued hard work. Her father built a successful industrial electrician business, where she gained hands-on experience helping manage operations. She earned a bachelor's degree in economics and worked in the field, laying a foundation of practical knowledge that would guide her future endeavors. Together, Chad and Dorothy first crossed paths in Barrie, where they fell in love, married, and started a family. After their first child's arrival, they dreamed of raising their kids away from city life. They found a rundown farm with rich soil and big potential, rolling up their sleeves to restore it. Over the next decade, while raising four children and working off farm jobs, they brought their property back to life. At first, they farmed conventionally, but Dorothy began to question the approach. She wondered if it suited their small scale and pushed to grow wholesome food for their family. In 2011, Chad faced serious health challenges, including back surgery and autoimmune issues. They discovered his symptoms improved with their farm raised food, sparking a deep dive into soil health and nutrition. Word spread about their flavorful, nutrient packed produce, and locals started buying from them. Dorothy, primarily home with the kids, saw a chance to support their community with quality food. It began with 50 chickens. Despite Chad's doubts about the costs, they grew from there. In 2016, they joined the Chicken Farmers of Ontario Artisanal Program, raising and selling 2,500 birds. The next year, their reputation earned them a wholesale deal through the local niche markets program, scaling up to 25,000 pasture raised chickens. The chickens transformed their soil, which they had seeded with hay for their horses and cattle. Intensive grazing brought the land to life, boosting hay yields and supporting more cattle. Combining Chad's technical expertise with Dorothy's economic insight, they now farm full time, proudly offering beef, pork, chicken, and eggs directly to their community through integrated farms. So a pleasure to have you, Chad and Dorothy. Over to you to share a little bit, and I'm going to share your screen now.
Well, first, we just want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity. It's an honor to be a presenter, and we hope you like it.
Yeah, it's a bit of an intro. So yeah, if you want to start sharing the presentation, we'll get right down to it because we're gonna give you basically the elevator speech on our farm. We could probably talk for hours, if not days, on our farm and how things have progressed and our challenges. But you're gonna get the real shortened version of how things have went. and to where we've got to today. So Dorothy and I, we've designed and built essentially all of our systems. There's no real resources we've been able to draw on in Canada because it's just nobody doing what we're doing. So we have been fortunate enough to join the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association, and that's where we've been able to draw a lot of resources, but it certainly is challenging in our climate to do what we do.
You can go to the next slide. So who we are, Dave kind of summed it up too, but we are Chad and Dorothy Coghlin of Integrated Farms. We both are first generation chicken farmers. We started our farm from scratch just south of Coldwater, Ontario, or just 20 minutes north of Barrie. We purchased 53 acres in 2005, just after we married and had our first child. Chad living on a farm, growing up in that kind of community, and so he was like a cat in a cage living in the city. I knew that right from the start when I met him. So, and then after the birth of our first child, I kind of knew where he was going and what he wanted to do, and wanted to share kind of a similar upbringing that he went through. And that's how we started.
Yes, so we basically purchased a fairly rundown farm. It had gone bankrupt, I think, a couple times. So it took us probably 10 years. We moved here with literally hand tools and a pickup truck. We couldn't, everything was done manually. We had to clear the land. We had to remove 700 fence posts and rolled up 10,000 feet of wire because it was actually an abandoned deer farm. So it had a lot of rundown fencing that was just inhibiting the farm from progressing. And there were vines and building, all kinds of crazy outbuildings that had fell down and vines covering everything. So but we kind of knew that it would be fairly decent soil. It's a lower land soil, and we kind of figured we could bring it back to life at some point. So if you want to go to the next slide. Want to start this one?
Sure. So how we started and why. So with our desire, really, as we were having kids, and me being home, I really wanted to like dive into, producing food for ourselves, kind of as a cost savings thing, and really get the kids involved in where their food came from and really learning the process of everything. It first came out with vegetables. We had a vegetable garden, and then we started off with 50 chickens, and every year we just kept increasing from there. We also, for me, when I was really learning about how food was being produced, and it didn't really set with me very well. And there was a few arguments between Chad and I. And so I just really wanted to envision this farm, what I thought, how my food was being raised, and like, animals being having access to the outside, being out, having sunlight and stuff like that, and not just, being 24 hours in a barn type thing. To me, that just didn't seem like a natural thing. I know for myself, I couldn't be stuck in a house 24/7. So, I enjoy the sunlight. I love going outside. And I just think that, Mother Nature designed everything to be that way. So that's how I wanted to raise our farm.
Yeah, so there were some arguments, admittedly. She bought the 50 chickens to raise, and I had done it as a kid and really didn't think much of it. And I said, well, you can buy a chicken a lot cheaper at the grocery store than you can raise it. And yeah, you shouldn't have said that to my wife. So just makes her more determined to do things. So, you get those chickens done and you realize, well, they do taste different, and they do seem to make us feel different. And then when I started getting sick, we really noticed that any food grown on our farm didn't make me sick at all. If Dorothy cooked stuff from the grocery store, it was kind of a 50-50, and restaurant food, pretty much, it was almost guaranteed I'd be sick. So we started to really deep dive in why. So If you want to go to the next slide. This one's a little video that is just kind of something we did a long time ago, and it's the very early time of our pastured chicken farm. These are videos we actually took from I think our first year, so it's a while back, but it's good to see.
We're just not sure if the audio will work here.
Doesn't matter too much. It's just they're nice pictures of our farm, and
So really,
it shows our pasture pens that we designed.
yeah, so kind of where we starting off with the 50 chickens. And then when Chicken Farmers of Ontario introduced the program, the artisanal program, I remember being at one of the local meetings here too, and they had said that they were introducing a program, because I was at the point too where at that time you had family food. And the 50 chickens, grew to 100 chickens, to 150 chickens, to, 300 chickens that I was growing directly from the farm here, and really offering the chickens like to my family and friends. And then everybody's like, you need to grow more. And then that's where Chad kind of explained to me supply management. And he said, you can't go beyond your 300. And then I looked into it. And so we were kind of capped at the 300. And then when we found out about the artisanal program, we just jumped on it because we already knew that there was a demand for it. My idea was, growing, going from 300 to maybe 1,000, maybe, a little more.
I ordered 2,500 chickens, just got it done.
Once we got approved into the program, he put in an order of 2,500 birds, and I was just like, what? So it was a little bit stressful and stuff like that. But after our first year, like, we sold out and, doing the program.
We had to work hard at it though. We went to every farmer's market in the area. There's a local flea market we were selling our chicken at. I mean, we had to really work at it, but we found that the demand was there for a chicken grown differently. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is where we kind of show that it really is different. It's not hocus pocus. This chicken doesn't taste different because it for no reason. When we started to do our research and I started reading a lot of books, the first year I actually had to sleep out with the chickens. I slept in the fields with the chickens. We moved our RV out into the field, and the dog and I would go out there every night and sleep with them because basically I had $100,000 of chickens sitting out in my field every night, and I wasn't sure if that was just going to be a smorgasbord for every wild animal in the countryside, and I figured I better probably go out there and keep an eye on them. So while I was out there every night, I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of nutrition books, and I read just anything anybody would recommend to me reading. And a lot of our books that we read came from our customers' recommendations. And there were customers that were looking for something that we grew. And what we quickly realized was the reason that I wasn't getting sick from our chicken, it wasn't from anything real nefarious, well, terribly nefarious anyhow. I maybe have a little different opinion on that now, but it was more that the chickens have a completely different nutrition profile. So we've spent the money multiple times now over the years. We've spent it, I think we've done 4 separate tests. So basically tested 8 chickens. So we always do a comparable chicken to ours, and then we could test, something from the grocery store and one of ours. And every time our tests have come back pretty similar, showing that our chickens, basically by getting a different environment, actually creates a nutritionally different chicken. And so we just highlighted some of the differences in the chickens here. And it doesn't matter what you test from the grocery store, whether it's RWA, organic, free from, any of the labels essentially that's given to you in the grocery store. All of those chickens in our testing has shown that they test the same. There's no real differences in their nutritional content, but when you compare it to our chicken, there's a substantial difference. So even something like the omega-3s is really one of the things that I highlighted early in our farming that we wanted to really focus on. So we focus on that with our pork and our beef. our eggs and our chickens no different. And we figured if we could produce a chicken that's a lot higher in omega-3s, that it would really help the population because it's one of the lowest cost meat proteins. And by producing a better chicken with that's high in omega-3s, it allows the access to better nutrition for more of the population. So that was something we wanted to focus on early, was to feed our community with nutrient dense chicken. And so we've actually been able to achieve a ratio on our omega-6 to 3s of about 6 to 1. That's getting down near grass-fed beef. It smokes grain-fed beef. And so you're getting more omega-3s in our chicken than you would in beef, which is kind of unheard of. And we've done multiple tests to prove that. And we've even tried adding supplements to our feed to increase the omega-3s. And, to those companies' dismay, it didn't change. We tested with and without their supplements, and it made zero difference. So that was a really interesting revelation that just by putting our birds out on pasture and having access to really lush greens every day, they're maxing out their omega-3 levels is the hypothesis anyhow, and that they don't really need an omega-3 supplement. So we're allowed to advertise that our chicken is actually a source of omega-3s, and we actually do that naturally through our pasture system.
So while we're getting the birds tested, so we are now legally with the CFIA allowed to have that designation where we can promote saying that our chickens is a high source of omega-3s, and that's not really a normal thing. And when you're looking at labels and stuff, you don't look at chicken kind of as a high omega-3.
So you can go to the next slide. Yeah, there's our monkeys. So I think this is a good one for Dorothy. The pictures here, all the pictures in the slides are from our farm, and pictures of our actual land and all of our implements and harvesting our hays and those kind of things. So you can kind of enjoy those.
Yeah, so over the years, as we have been having the chickens out on our land, we've really seen a lot of, birds coming back. We're kind of surrounded with like horse farms, and we also have conventional farming as well surrounding us. And a lot of when we first started out, like our land was it hadn't been farmed in a very long time. And when we were first doing when we first moved to the farm, we rented our land out. So we had other farmers working our land. And then when we started doing with the chickens, and the yields weren't that great, they were okay, but it wasn't that great. So then once we started putting the chickens on, we started to do hay. And so our first couple of years, we noticed like the production wasn't great either, what the other farmers were saying. So we would, on average, get about 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of hay per acre throughout the entire season. Last year was probably one of our record-breaking years. So it'll be roughly about 10 years since we started with the chickens on the volumes that we have been doing. And now we've been able to increase our hay yields from 1,500 to around 10,000 pounds per year. So, and that's just putting chickens on the land and doing rotational grazing. So, and each part of the land has only the chickens on it for 1 day a year. So it's not like we overlap or anything like that throughout the year. It's 1 day a year those chickens are on. So then they get, 364 days of kind of rest type thing with regards to you not putting any other animal on the property.
Well, one of the really neat things we noticed too when we started putting the chickens on the land is, they really benefit from it. I mean, they'll strip an alfalfa plant of every leaf. They'll forage almost like a cow. They get rid of all of the greenery very quick. They clean it right off. But what they leave behind with their manure is pretty amazing too. So our first year what we'd notice when we moved the pens, their manure would stay on the land for about 2 weeks, and then it would kind of work its way in. And I just kind of assumed that was it needed to get washed into the soil with rain or sunshine or whatever it was to break it down. But what I didn't realize was, now we're seeing that manure breaks down very quickly and disappears within about 2 or 3 days. And so what that is we've reactivated and created an entire new network of microorganisms in our soil that help move nutrients around, break nutrients down, and use those nutrients to feed the plants. So we're getting huge benefits from that. Our land is very drought tolerant, very flood tolerant. Our neighboring farmers who originally told us that we're nuts and crazy, and we probably are a little bit, but they've now come around and they're noticing that our hay yields are exceeding theirs, and our land is green when we have droughts, and when we have the big rainfalls, the we don't get the ponding in our fields anymore. The soil is able to absorb so much more with any extreme weather event as well. So even our we have some hives on our farm, and our bee farmer generally he exclaims too that our hives are one of his most productive hives in his entire rotation. So.
And I like to give the example as well too. So a couple of years ago, not sure if you guys remember about how we had the problems with the caterpillars and stuff. So we didn't notice it at first on our farm. We were just driving around when we would leave the farm, and everybody duct taping all their trees and trying to save their trees from the caterpillars and stuff like that, and how they were just destroying their trees and any plants really in their way. But on our farm, we found that they weren't affecting our trees or anything like that, and we really attribute that to the chickens. And what really kind of changed my mind on that, or verified that, was my son and I went to the very back of our farm where the chickens don't go to, because it's kind of like a wooded bush area, so it's hard for us to move the pasture pens there. And we were just sitting there watching everything. We've got a little stream in the back there, and we were just sitting, and it was dead silent. But then we were just listening to nature, and you could hear like chomp, 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 chomp. And then I went further into the bush, and then I could see the leaves being eaten and everything. And then so the caterpillars had gotten to the back of our farm. But at the front, I truly believe that it was because of the chickens. They were the ones eating the larvae in the early stages, and really protected our farm from the infestation of those caterpillars.
So it's just really neat to see how we can work with Mother Nature, and it's not necessarily, some coyotes in the field eating some extra, mice and stuff like that isn't a bad thing. And, we can kind of work with it and work around it. The owls, we have a lot of owls now where we didn't have before. It's a really satisfying thing to see when you sit down in the field and the sun's going down and you can see all the activity in the field of the bugs and the bees and the birds, and we have all these field birds. When we move our pens each day, they've got used to us being out there, and they'll actually roost on the cables on the pens that we use to pull the pens around. And it's just a really satisfying experience. It's something that I had to unlearn from growing up with 5 or 6 generations of farming, and really kind of making Mother Nature my enemy, and instead we're trying to figure out how to work with her in a productive manner. So we're producing 180,000 pounds of meat off of our farm, and it's only 50 acres. We can feed a lot of families with that, and with very little outside inputs. So you can go to the next slide. And so this one,
it's a bit wordy.
It's a bit wordy. It is what it is. We've been trying to work with the chicken farmers of Ontario, and we really appreciate them creating the local niche markets program and the artisanal program. I think that's very forward thinking of them. And I think some of the other supply management boards have a lot to learn from the chicken farmers in how they've approached that. And I think that's amazing. I guess part of the issues that we have is they didn't really expect somebody like us to come along. And we only recently realized that because we've been trying to get meetings with them and kind of a review process for years, but we kind of kept getting put off for all various different reasons. And we had a meeting with them this fall, and they basically said to us that they expected a core farmer who wanted to self-market his chickens to come along, not necessarily a seasonal pastured chicken grower. So I guess that was our mistake, and so now they're kind of stuck with us, and we're just trying to figure out how to make it work. Because we own quota, they've put us in the category with all of their other quota farmers, and
Core business.
it makes it very difficult for a seasonal self-marketed pastured chicken grower to basically even fill out the paperwork. We fill out a lot of not applicables. We fill out a lot of paperwork that is kind of silly, like, our processor is contracted to us when he's really just a custom kill operation. We truck all our own birds. We have to fill out separate paperwork for trucking as if we're a separate company. It's all kind of fake stuff to make their computer system work for us with our unusual growing methods. Another one that really came up this year was we really love the rustic ranger birds, and they are amazing at pasturing. The problem with it is they grow too long. So it takes us about 77 days to grow a rustic ranger. And what we found was their quota system can't handle something growing that long. So we started it in the last period of one cycle, and we actually finished in two periods later. So their computer system couldn't handle it. So yeah, I think it's all kind of there. Like we have some challenges with the system. There's we would love to work with CFO on it and try to figure something out a little more expanded. Probably on the artisanal program makes a little more sense than sticking us with core business. It really just it's not compatible with a pastured chicken model, so it's really challenging to make it work.
So we're kind of always on uncharted waters because us being, first generation chicken farmers, not having any chicken growing background, even in core business. And then to bring this whole pasture raised type chicken philosophy into their system. And, when we moved from the artisanal program, which doesn't require you to have quota, but it does require you to apply annually. When we moved to the local niche is where you have to have production quota. So one of our biggest obstacles was obviously to obtain quota, number one. And then number two, realizing the cost of quota. And then even with CFO, they have the new entrant program where, a new farmer can come in, but they're given enough quotas, roughly 14,000 units of quota, but they only have to buy like 4,000 units up front. And then the balance is amortized over 15 years where, they can still produce 100% of the chicken, but they don't need to put up the upfront costs of quota at the very beginning. So like I said, it's amortized over 15 years. Whereas in our program, we're maxed at 10,000 units.
You can probably go to the next slide, and it kind of applies to the same type of things.
So you're maxed out with how many units you're allowed to have, but really your biggest constraint is how much quota you can cough up front. And that really dictates how many chickens you have to grow, because that's really where your numbers need to work. So we've come up with a few solutions and ideas to CFO with regards to all of our issues that we have had. One is to simplify the reporting. There's a lot of redundant work that's being done. Core business.
Like we don't even follow. Another example is you really rigidly have to follow the quota calendar, which I understand because they allocate certain amount of chicken per quota period, and that comes right down from the federally from the chicken farmers. And we can kind of allocate what periods we're going to grow in. But I mean, the quota calendar, as far as our growth or any our grow rates or our placement dates, is not even like there's nothing applicable there. So it makes it incredibly challenging. And we had no idea of any of this stuff. Like we didn't know there was a CFO Connects portal that we had to file. Like we had no idea any of this before we got into the program. So that was a massive learning curve.
So any small farmer or any person just coming in and into that system without having any type of, chicken farming background is going to come into being really blindsided with a lot of the stuff that is done, that needs to be done.
So we came up with just a real quick list. I mean, they're just ideas. We're just things that we think could. So we're just going to run through the list quickly, and then we want to wrap it up and get more to a discussion. So, with the artisanal, they grow the number. They're limited to the number of birds, not the kilograms. With a pastured chicken model, your birds are going to grow at different rates based on the weather in that batch. And essentially the forage available in the field. And there's not a lot of ways to regulate that. And we're stuck with our different processing dates because they're very rigid on that. And with the availability of processing too, it makes it very difficult to process the birds at a different time. A new entrant program for pastured chicken or some type of small scale farming. Right now, they don't have anything, so you have to buy all your quota up front. Unlike core business, where they loan them out 3/4 of the quota for free for a period of 15 years, they have to buy it back in. A separate system for growing the rustic or the Freedom Ranger birds. There already is kind of a framework for the specialty breeds. They don't require quota for those birds for the Asian markets, and that's carved out of the existing system. I don't see how the rustic birds would be much of a different bird. They're a longer growing season bird. They wouldn't compete with core business in any way. And they're an amazing bird on pasture. They do a lot better on pasture than the white bird. Well, maybe not better, but they certainly enjoy walking around a lot more than the white rocks. Self-marketing is another one where that doesn't seem to really resonate with core business. They don't self-market really anything. So when you're self-marketing, you're filling out a lot of paperwork that doesn't seem to apply to the core business system. And like we said, I think a totally separate pastured chicken system would have, really needs to be explored, because we know personally that Maple Lodge has looked at importing pastured chicken from the United States, because we've met with the company in the United States that grows them, and they've said that they've been approached to send chicken to Canada. And the reason is because there is no framework here in Canada that makes growing pastured chicken very easy. So it's quite difficult. And encouraging multi-species, I think, is another big one where it helps our profitability instead of discouraging it. Like a great example is how we're able to feed our cattle with the manure produced on our hay fields from our chickens directly pasturing on the land. That's incredible. And then the other one is the layers. We'd love to see some type of complementary layer program as well, because we literally have fist fights over our eggs and we're allowed 99 layers. But we also love the benefit that those layers are able to give our land and how they rejuvenate our land. And they go through they're just an amazing animal to have on your land, and how they can reduce your parasites, work in manure, or aerate the land from being smothered from even just grasses and excess vegetation. Processing is another one that's a challenge for us, and I think a tiered processing rule thing would work a lot better than, I think 90% of our chicken is processed by 2 or 3 processors. That's kind of a scary place to be in, especially looking at the tariffs and, all those kind of things where, you're really controlled by a really small number. where if we had more tiered type processing rules where smaller direct to consumer processors were, scrutinized and had a little more laxer rules. Not necessarily, they still need to have the same processes, but I really think that that could really help open up the market a lot. We know of lots of guys doing it in the States, and I don't see how that couldn't apply up here. Um, uh, yeah, right now we're capped at 10,000 quota units. It would be nice to be able to, if we were able to see a path to growth,
To go beyond that.
especially with the bank, or we're trying to look at opening our own processing facility. Capping us at 10,000 units makes the business case very challenging when, you have really such strict rules for processing and the costs associated with that. You know, to have us stuck at a small scale and then build our own processing doesn't make a lot of sense if we have no path to growth. Um, with the pastured chicken model, it would be nice to be able to, because we're transferring the chickens from a brooder space to a pastured grow out space. Um, it would be nice to be able to put my chickens on my rented land. So we rent pasture land and rent hay land, and we can't put our chickens on that land
Right.
under current regulations. We're only allowed to put our chickens on our own home farm. So it would be nice to be able to, grow the chickens on those land and add the nutrients and the fertilizer to those land. Um, Access to capital is always a challenge, especially when you're in this kind of space, when you're so unique. Access to capital is a real challenge. And just the seasonal growing also is another one. So
currently in the local niche bylaws, they don't speculate or specifically say like, seasonal growing. So we had to get a special exemption from the Chicken Farmers of Ontario. So because we are a pastured chicken, that we do have seasonal growing exemptions. So our quota is annualized. But even though we have to report everything per quota period, so then we have to go through a process where, we're penalized because we overproduced or underproduced in certain quota periods. And so then we have to go to the board and ask for forgiveness and then, state why. And it's because we have the seasonal exemption. So it's just it's a lot of unnecessary stress and a lot of unnecessary work, I think, for us and for them.
yeah, like CFO, there's no way they make enough money to administrate us. Like we must be a serious thorn in their side for their administration, because they're always having to go in and manually adjust the computer system to not fine us or to reverse fines or do different things because they can't figure out how we have so many birds at a time because our batches overlap because we have birds in a brooder at the same time we have them on our grow up pens. And so it doesn't make sense with their computer system. So they're constantly having to administrate us, and for us to pay $300 for administration every quota period or whatever, just doesn't seem, I'm sure they don't cover their costs. So
Next slide. Yeah. So that's really it. I think we covered most of our stuff. Obviously, we didn't go into full detail and stuff, but by all means, if any of you have any questions or anything like that, we'd be more than happy to share. So we just wanted to give you kind of a overview of our operations and kind of the challenges and successes that we have had. But like we said, we're the only ones in our program doing it, so we don't get a chance really to talk to anybody about it. And so we would really like to talk to, people who think, are we really that crazy? Do you think there is an opportunity like this for Canada and Ontario? And we would love to see more people doing what we're doing.
like we've seen the growth in the United States over the last 10 years. Like we went to a pastured poultry conference, and there's 50 people in the room, and we went back last year to Texas for the conference, and there's 2,000 people in the room and a mini trade show. So there's obviously an appetite there. You can look at something like Purdue in the States, where they've invested tens of millions of dollars into a research farm in Georgia. They're producing 30,000 chickens a week. They have 1 million chickens there a year. They have 6,000 square foot pasture pens that are mobile. They move every single day. And, you know, you see the growth and the entrepreneurship of this industry. And it's something, you know, we are truly producing a different chicken for our communities, and it's healthier for us. It's healthier for our environment. And, you know, we need very little outside inputs for something like this. And it's able to produce all this beef from our land as well. So, you know, the pictures here kind of show that as well. In the top left-hand corner, that's one of our little layer pens. And in the background is our 6,000 square feet worth of pasture pens for our broilers. So we have to keep the layers a certain distance away from the broilers, the way the current regulations are. And then the bottom left-hand picture, that's all the hay that we're producing off the same field while we're growing the broilers on that same field as well. So it's pretty amazing to see what we're able to accomplish.
So even with, you know, we started off with, you know, 3-4 cattle, and then now we're sitting at 60-65 cattle on our farm that we're able to feed off our land 365 days a year on hay that is strictly harvested on our land. And, you know, and we still have extra hay that we are able to sell off as dry hay to, you know, to custom to
Horse farmers,
farmers.
neighboring horse farmers and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So